The millionaire's twin sons couldn't walk until he caught the housekeeper doing something unbelievable. Daniel Whitmore stood motionless in the entryway, the unsigned contract still in his hand. It was the fourth time in 8 weeks someone had walked out. This scene had become all too familiar. "They're truly unbearable," the young woman continued, her face flushed with a mix of anger and fear. "Your children are not normal. They don't speak, they don't walk, they just stand motionless, staring into nothing, or they scream and smash everything if someone moves their toys. This isn't a job for a nurse, it's a job for a psychiatric ward." Each word felt like a stab, but Daniel Whitmore showed no emotion. He had learned how to endure such attacks, letting the accusations about his children pass through him without collapsing in front of strangers. He simply waited for her to finish. When the silence finally came, he spoke in a low, lifeless voice. "Marcia will see you to the gate and settle your pay." Anna looked at him for a second, perhaps expecting an argument or a plea for her to stay. But there was nothing. She huffed, grabbed her luggage with a sharp movement, and stormed off, slamming the door so hard that a crystal vase on the table trembled. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. It was a heavy, oppressive silence. Daniel closed his eyes. Fear and guilt, those were his constant companions, shadows that clung to him in every room of the mansion. A year ago, this place had still been filled with laughter. It was the laughter of Amanda, his wife. Eli and Noah, his 5-year-old twin sons, hadn't uttered a single word since that fateful day. The day the car skidded off the road, and Amanda, the woman he loved more than anything, was gone in an instant without a goodbye. Since then, this house had become a shell. Every wall, every step on the staircase echoed with grief. The once warm, luxurious rooms now resembled a museum. Everything preserved, nothing truly alive. He moved slowly up the stairs, each step sounding louder than it should in the vast hollow space. Passing by the playroom, he paused, glancing through the barely open door. The 2 5-year-old twin boys were sitting on the soft carpet, just as the nanny had described. Noah, younger than his brother by 7 minutes, was staring out the window, his large dark eyes fixed on some point in the garden. The boy seemed separated from the world, a form of self-defense against any sound or movement that might frighten him, especially metallic noises like the sound of a car crash. On the other side of the carpet, Eli was completely absorbed in his row of wooden toy cars. He arranged them by color with absolute precision. His small shoulders were tense. Daniel Whitmore knew that if even one car was moved an inch to the side, the silence would shatter into rage and tears. He stepped into the room, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hello, boys." There was no response. He knelt down beside Eli. "These cars are beautiful. Are you arranging them?" Eli didn't move. His small hand remained on the blue car, as if considering whether it was in exactly the right spot. Daniel started to reach out and touch his son's hair, but stopped short. That touch could be the trigger. The fear of causing a breakdown froze him. He turned to Noah. "Noah, what do you see out there? A bird?" The boy stayed still, his breathing steady, as if his father wasn't even there. And for them, perhaps he truly didn't exist. Daniel felt like a ghost in his own home, haunting his children's lives. The pain of losing Isadora was an open wound, but the pain of watching his children drift lost within themselves was a slow torment, stretching on day after day. He walked to the window, trying to see what had captured Noah's attention. There was nothing, only the trees and the gray sky of São Paulo. "Mr. Daniel," came the gentle voice of Marcia, the housekeeper who had been with the family for over 20 years, from the doorway. He turned to her. Her face carried a restrained look of worry. "She's gone?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Yes, sir." Marcia glanced at the boys, her eyes heavy with deep sadness. "You need to rest. I can't. Look at them. The boys need time, sir, and perhaps a different kind of help. Daniel ran a hand over his face, feeling the rough stubble. I've brought them to the best doctors, the best psychologists. They say it's trauma, that we must be patient. But how can I be patient when my children seem to be disappearing right before my eyes? He moved away from the window, feeling as though the walls of the room were closing in on him. Luxury, expensive toys, elegant furniture, designer clothes, it all felt like a cruel joke. He would trade it all, every last cent, just to hear his children's voices again, to see them run to him when he returned from work, to be their father again, not merely the keeper of their sorrow. The morning after Anna quit, Marcia sat at the kitchen table before the sun had risen. She held a cup of coffee, but didn't drink it. Her gaze lingered on the open contact book in front of her. Nursing agencies were no longer an option. This house didn't need another young woman with a teaching manual in her hands who didn't understand that grief follows no rules. This house needed quiet, order, and a presence that could tend to the space without invading the people within it. She thought of Daniel, of his silent pain. She thought of the two boys lost in their own world. A decision formed in her mind with clarity. She would not look for a nanny. She would look for a housekeeper, someone mature, discreet, and who understood that sometimes dust is lighter than sorrow. She flipped through the book, skimming familiar names and phone numbers, until she stopped at the name Grace Moreno, a woman once recommended by a friend. Next to it, only a brief note. Serious, efficient, in need of work. Across the city, in a small, meticulously kept apartment that felt almost sterile, Grace Moreno was drying the kitchen sink with a soft cloth. Her movements were rhythmic, detached, mechanical. Her mind told her, keep cleaning, keep everything in order, and you'll be fine. But deep down, she knew, no amount of bleach could scrub away the hollowness inside. Brandon, her only son, had died 3 years ago. A fall at the playground, a phone call at dusk, a sterile condolence. Since then, Grace had left her job as a special education teacher, left the classroom, left the version of herself that used to feel joy. When the phone rang, she thought it was another spam call, but the voice on the line gave her pause. Hello, my name is Marcia, housekeeper for the Whitmore family. I got your contact from Teresa, an old friend. We're looking for someone to help with housework. Grace hesitated. I only clean. I don't do child care. Her voice was flat, trained to keep emotion from bleeding into her words. We need someone who can work quietly, precisely, without questions. But we also need someone who understands that sometimes the dirt isn't on the floor. Grace said nothing, but something inside her stirred. A few hours later, she stood before the towering gates of the Whitmore mansion. Stone walls, manicured lawns, perfect hedges. It looked like a postcard, but it felt more like a mausoleum, not a single toy out of place. No laughter, a place so perfect it chilled her. Marcia greeted her with a soft smile and a knowing look. Welcome, Grace. I'll walk you through the routines. But first, there's something you should see. They approached a room with large glass doors. Sunlight poured in. Inside was the children's playroom. Through the glass, Grace saw Eli lining up toy cars with obsessive precision. Noah sat motionless, staring into nothing. Just two little boys. But Grace, someone who had once walked through grief's fire, recognized that neither child was truly present in their own life. We're not asking anyone to fix them, Marcia said gently. We just need someone who knows how not to break them further. Grace tightened her grip on her bag. I understand, she whispered. That very day, Grace Moreno stepped off the bus and stood before the tall gates of the mansion. The place was exactly as she had imagined, majestic, flawless, and cold. The gardens were like works of art, but there wasn't a single toy scattered about, no sign of a child's life. Marcia greeted her at the door with a restrained smile. "Welcome, Grace. Please come in." As Marcia led her through the rooms explaining the work, Grace observed closely. Her gaze was unusual. She had the ability to notice what people didn't show, to sense what wasn't said. She saw the rigidity in the arrangement of the furniture, the absence of any recent photographs, and the heavy atmosphere that even open windows couldn't dispel. From the hallway she saw them, the two boys. Marcia stopped before a glass door that looked into a sunlit playroom. "These are the boys, Eli and Noah." Grace looked in. One boy was lining up toy cars with fierce concentration. The other stared at the ceiling, entirely detached from reality. They were just two small children, but a deep instinct, born from a pain she knew all too well, allowed her to see through that silence. She saw the tense shoulders of Eli, a clear sign that the boy was desperately trying to control something in his world. She saw the vacant eyes of Noah, the gaze of someone who had learned to detach from reality in order to survive. Her heart ached. She could feel the atmosphere in the room, a fragile quiet that could shatter with a single wrong movement. A faint wave of nausea came over her. Too familiar, far too much like what she had once lived through. "Grace, are you all right?" Marcia asked, noticing her hesitation. Grace blinked, forcing her expression back to neutrality. She steadied herself, clinging to the simplicity of her new job. "Yes, of course. Sorry. The house is just very big, that's all," she lied. "Where would you like to start cleaning?" "The kitchen. I'll show you where the supplies are." Grace nodded, relieved to move away from that glass door. Her work was buckets and rags, not the sorrows of a stranger's family. And things needed to stay that way. Grace's first day drifted by like a thin layer of smoke, quiet without a trace, nearly invisible. She didn't speak to Eli or Noah, didn't get close, didn't smile too much. She didn't try to start a conversation, didn't attempt to connect. She simply did the one thing she was hired to do: clean, tidy, and organize in silence. But every step she took had intention. In the kitchen, she replaced the cold white bulbs with soft amber lights from the basement supply closet. No explanation offered. She only told Marcia that the warmer glow made the space feel less like a hospital. In the dining room, she stuck felt pads to the bottom of the hardwood chairs, so they don't scratch the floor. But in truth, she wanted to silence the harsh screech that made Noah flinch every time a chair moved. In the hallway, where wind often slammed the playroom door into the wall, she quietly placed a heavy fabric doorstop. No one asked. She didn't explain, but she saw the flicker of gratitude in Marcia's eyes. While cleaning the storage closet, Grace stumbled upon an old lamb's wool rug, a small wicker basket, and some peculiar objects: a smooth river stone, a square of deep blue velvet, a dried pine cone. She arranged them in a quiet corner of the playroom, a space she privately called the calm zone. When Marcia passed by and noticed, Grace said simply, "I found these while organizing. Thought they might go nicely here, but I can put them away if it's not right." Marcia nodded. "No harm. Looks nice, actually." Grace knew healing didn't begin with words. It began with creating safety, a space where no one had to fight to survive. In the days that followed, Grace continued her subtle shifts. One evening, she visited a stationery store and returned with a small magnetic board and a set of simple picture magnets: a sun, a plate, a bathtub, a moon. The next morning, she mounted the board near the kitchen and told Marcia, "I tend to forget what task comes next, so I figured this might help me stay organized." She pointed to each icon: morning, lunch, bath, bedtime. The truth was, she didn't need a visual schedule, but she knew children like Eli and Noah did. They needed predictability, a visual map to navigate their fragile routines. And then what she had been hoping for happened, quietly, almost invisibly. One afternoon, before dinner, Eli stopped at the board. He looked at the plate icon placed next to the sun, and when Marcia called him, he walked. No tantrum, no resistance, just a slower pace. Grace said nothing, but warmth bloomed quietly inside her. A few days later, when Noah seemed unsettled, she watched him drift toward the calm zone, sit down on the soft rug, and pick up the river stone. He rolled it slowly in his palm, breathing just a bit deeper. No one else noticed, but she did. These first movements weren't miracles. They were signs. Signs that life still stirred inside, and if given enough patience, it might slowly emerge. Grace understood this deeply, because once she had waited for her own child to show such signs and never got the chance. But this time, she wouldn't look away. The following afternoon, while dusting a bookshelf in the living room, Grace Moreno accidentally caught a glimpse of Eli's world. The boy was sitting on the carpet, building a city out of wooden blocks. Everything was perfectly symmetrical, each block placed with the precision of a ruler. When Grace reached up toward the top shelf, her elbow brushed against a little toy soldier guarding the city gate, knocking it over gently. The reaction was instant and intense. The silence was torn apart by a piercing scream, the sound of pure fear that seemed impossible to come from such a small body. Eli crumpled onto the floor, hands clamped over his ears, his face flushed red. This wasn't a tantrum, it was panic. Marcia appeared within seconds, her weary expression that of someone who had seen this scene hundreds of times. She didn't look at Grace, only at the boy. "Easy now, sweetheart, easy. We'll fix it right away." With slow, deliberate movements, she knelt down, picked up the toy soldier, and set it back exactly where it had been, down to the same angle. Bit by bit, Eli's screams subsided into sobs. He didn't look at anyone, only kept his eyes fixed on the soldier, now restored to its place, as his breathing began to steady. Marcia stood, speaking softly to Grace, while Eli was still calming down. "Don't worry, it's not your fault. For Eli, everything must stay exactly where it belongs. That's how he keeps the world safe." Grace nodded, her heart tightening. She recognized the need to control a tiny corner of the world when everything else had collapsed. Later, Noah's world revealed itself. Grace was polishing the steel kitchen counter when, outside, a delivery man dropped a metal crate. The loud crash startled her. Noah, who had been sitting on the sofa with a picture book he wasn't really reading, froze. He didn't scream like his brother. Instead, his shoulders hunched, his eyes went wide for a split second in deep fear. And then, like a candle being snuffed out, he went completely still. His gaze went vacant, his body unmoving. He retreated into a safe place inside himself, hiding from the sound that echoed the accident. When Marcia passed by a few minutes later, she only sighed. "Ah, Noah, those sounds frighten him so much. He'll stay like that for a while, then he'll come back." Grace looked at the boy, her chest swelling with compassion. Eli's pain erupted outward, while Noah's folded inward, leaving a cold emptiness. The brothers, bound by the same trauma, reacted in opposite ways, each stranded on his own island of sorrow. At the end of the day, as she put away her cleaning supplies, Grace saw Daniel Whitmore return. He no longer carried the aura of power, only the look of a man bearing the weight of the world on his shoulders. He went straight to the room where his boys were. From a distance, Grace watched the way he approached them, slow, cautious, as if afraid they might shatter further. Before leaving in the upstairs hallway, Grace witnessed the scene that closed the day's picture. Daniel in his son's bedroom, switching on the two small bedside lamps, one beside each bed. The warm yellow glow filled the room, but he didn't turn off the ceiling light. As he stepped out, he left the door ajar, a wide crack remaining. The hallway light stayed on. Fear lived in that house, a permanent resident that didn't leave when the sun went down. It slept in rooms bathed in light, doors left half open, a reminder that total darkness and absolute silence were too dangerous to face. On her way back to the bus stop, returning to her own life and her own pain, Grace could not shake the image of the two boys. She didn't want that feeling, the connection, the pain that mirrored her own. But it was already too late. Eli and Noah's pain had found a refuge in her heart. The image of the two boys, each lost on his own lonely island, haunted Grace through the night. In her small apartment, where silence was a choice rather than an illness, she recalled every detail of the Whitmore mansion: the cold, almost hospital-like light in the bedroom, the doors slamming from drafts, the sound of footsteps echoing across marble floors. The boys' world was a minefield of triggers for their wounds. One evening, he stepped into the playroom and saw Noah flipping through a book. The difference was subtle. Before, he would only hold a book blankly, his eyes empty. Now his finger was tracing the image of a small boat, as if showing some interest. In another corner, Eli was still arranging dolls, but his shoulders were no longer as tense as before, and his breathing was lighter. After that, he went to find Marcia. "How were the boys today?" It was the usual question, but his voice carried a faint change. "A peaceful day, sir." "Very peaceful. Grace, the new one, has a good way with them. She cleans while playing little games, keeping them occupied. I think the distraction is good for them." Distraction? The word echoed in Daniel Whitmore's mind. He thanked Marcia and withdrew into his study. A small spark of hope flickered, but he quickly extinguished it, out of habit, ingrained as instinct. He had hoped before, had put his faith in the promises of the best specialists, the most advanced therapies, the most expensive treatments. Each time, hope began bright and ended in a dead end, the disappointment sharper than before. He had learned the hard way that hope was a trap. It made him lower his guard, only to be crushed once more. Looking at Amanda's photo on his desk, the smile that reminded him of a time when trust came easily. He knew that protecting his children now also meant protecting himself from the pain of another failure. The peace he felt in the house at that moment was surely an illusion, a coincidence of a good week. It couldn't be real. He couldn't allow himself to believe. That night he stood at his children's doorway, watching them sleep. Their faces were calm under the warm yellow light, the kind the new housekeeper had switched to. A part of him, the part he despised, longed to believe this was the beginning of something. But the fear was greater. The fear of being deluded again made him choose the safety of familiar sorrow over the frightening fragility of new hope. That afternoon had seemed the most promising. In the kitchen, the air was no longer silent, but filled with quiet focus. Eli was standing at the low counter on his hero mission in the kitchen. His legs still trembled, but he managed to stay standing for nearly 10 seconds, eyes fixed on the bowl, while Grace counted softly, full of encouragement. 6, 7, 8. "Well done, hero. You can rest now." In the hallway, Noah was pushing a small toy car along the strip of blue tape. His steps were still hesitant, relying on the car for balance, but there was a glimmer of determination on his face. He wasn't moving because he had to. He was playing. For the first time, Grace felt the invisible wall around them truly begin to crack. She allowed herself a small smile, a moment of pure, innocent joy. Just then, the front door opened. Daniel stepped in. A major meeting had been canceled, so he decided to come home early, something rare. What struck his eyes was not the usual heavy silence, but strips of colored tape stuck to the marble floor. He froze, a flicker of irritation rising. "What is this mess?" He walked further in, drawn toward the gentle voice of Grace coming from the kitchen. Standing in the doorway, the scene before him made his blood run cold. This wasn't a game. In his weary and deeply suspicious mind, it looked like a therapy session. The floor marked, a stopwatch on the table, and the woman he had hired to clean the house guiding his children through some kind of exercise, counting like a therapist. Every alarm bell in him went off at once. It was the same old story, empty promises, methods that had never worked. The hope he had kept buried for so long suddenly turned into a cold, sharp anger. "What is this?" His voice was icy, cutting through the air. Grace Moreno startled and turned, her heart pounding. The smile on her face vanished instantly. Eli flinched at his father's voice, while Noah, standing in the hallway, froze in place, the toy car abandoned. "Daniel Whitmore, you're home early," she said, trying to keep her composure. She stood up, subtly shifting to place herself between him and the children. "I asked you, what is this?" he repeated, ignoring her greeting. His eyes swept over the scene with a look full of disdain. "What are you doing with my children?" Grace swallowed hard, instinctively slipping back into the role of the housekeeper. "Just a game, sir, to get them moving a bit and make cleaning more fun. I've noticed they're calmer when they play this way. It's just a game." Daniel gave a short, humorless laugh. "Doesn't look like a game. Looks exactly like the techniques those so-called experts used here before. You weren't hired to do this. You were hired to clean floors, not to meddle with my children's minds or plant false hope in me." The accusation hit her hard. False hope. That was exactly what he saw. "Sir, I would never hurt them." "I don't want to hear it." He cut her off, his face closing like stone, determination hardening his features. The pain of past disappointments had blinded him. He believed he was protecting his children, or at least that's what he told himself, protecting them from another failure. "Pack your things. I want you out of my house. Now." The words hung in the air. Grace looked at him, shocked and hurt, but she knew there was no room for argument. The man before her was not a father witnessing his children's progress. He was a wounded soul reacting to a threat he thought he saw. Then their world collapsed. Hearing their father's voice, seeing the pain on Grace's face, Eli let out a piercing scream. He knocked the bowl off the kitchen counter, the hollow sound of plastic hitting the floor echoing through the room. Order had been destroyed. In the hallway, Noah began to tremble. His eyes went wide with terror, and then, like someone had flipped a switch, he went completely still. His face became blank. He had retreated deep inside himself. The peace Grace had spent weeks building vanished in less than a minute. The hallway, once a racetrack for hope, had turned into a minefield. Silence returned, but this time it was the silence of panic and despair. Heartbroken, Grace stepped to the small cabinet, took her handbag and coat. She looked one last time, one child screaming, the other frozen, and their father standing in the middle of the chaos he had just created, believing he had done the right thing. She turned away, closing the front door softly behind her, leaving the Whitmore family to sink back into darkness. That night, the house sank into a silence unlike any other. Not the hollow stillness of before, but a heavy, suffocating quiet, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Noah didn't leave his bed. Eli curled into the corner, ignoring the neat line of toy cars still mid-formation. Dinner sat untouched, gone cold. Daniel wandered through the rooms, trying to keep busy, to avoid the clawing guilt inside him. While tidying the boy's bedroom, he spotted a scrap of paper wedged under the desk leg. It was a crude drawing. 2 small stick figures, one with spiky hair like Eli, the other a little shorter, like Noah. Between them stood a woman with long hair, holding both boys' hands. All 3 were smiling. Above them, in shaky, uneven letters, it read, "The house is calm when she's here." Next to the woman's figure, in smaller letters, Grace. Daniel sat right where he was, the paper trembling in his hands. His eyes blurred, and he didn't bother to wipe them. This wasn't a specialist's evaluation, nor a therapist's report. It was the purest, simplest truth, from 2 children who had shut the world out for over a year. And he knew. He hadn't sent Grace away to protect his sons. He had sent her away to protect himself from believing, from hoping, from risking disappointment one more time. But the cost was his children. He bowed his head, the ink on the drawing smudging under falling tears. For the first time in years, Daniel wasn't crying for his loss. He was crying for his own mistake. Daniel couldn't sleep. The drawing lay on his desk under the warm glow of a desk lamp, both a sentence and a map. By the first light of morning, he was ready. Not in his usual crisp suit, but in a simple sweater and worn jeans. Today, he wasn't going as a CEO. He was going as a father. He walked into the kitchen where Marcia was already making coffee. One look at the paper in his hand, and she understood. Without a word, she opened a drawer and pulled out a small slip of paper. "This is her address," Marcia said, her voice soft but steady. "If you're going to go, go now." The drive from the quiet suburbs to the worn-down apartment complex in the city was short, but it felt endless. Daniel carried the weight of a man stepping out of his domain of control into a world where he held none. He knocked. 3 firm raps, then silence. When the door opened, Grace stood there. For a split second, surprise flickered in her eyes, then was replaced by composure, as if she'd already built a wall. "Daniel!" "Grace?" His voice caught. He held out the drawing. "I'm sorry. There's no other way to say it. I was wrong. So wrong." She looked at the drawing, and for a moment her eyes softened. But then she looked back up, her tone even. "If I come back, it won't be like before." "I agree. Any conditions?" Grace folded her arms. "First condition, transparency. You'll know everything I do with the boys, and I'll need to know everything about them, from sleep patterns to what scares them. No secrets." "I agree." "Second, you participate. You don't hire me and stay on the sidelines. You'll sit on the floor, play with them, be their anchor." "I will." Third, no illusions. No. I won't promise miracles, just 1% progress a day, and the patience to accept that. "I understand, and I accept." Grace held his gaze. "Last, I'm not coming back as a housekeeper. I'm coming back as a routine and development coordinator. My job will be to create an environment where they feel safe enough to try." Daniel nodded, not just because he needed her, but because he believed her. Then, "Please come back." And that morning, a new agreement was made, not between an employer and an employee, but between a father and someone who had found the path to heal his family. The morning Grace returned to the Whitmore house, it felt as if the weather itself had shifted. Sunlight spilled through the trees, reflecting off the windows that for so long had only mirrored gray. Eli and Noah stood at the threshold of the playroom as she walked in. They didn't run to her, didn't smile, but they didn't turn away either. Their eyes followed her every step, as if trying to confirm this was real. Grace crouched down, set her bag aside, and gently placed a smooth river stone on the table. "Today, we're starting a new adventure," she said softly, without a trace of pressure. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching. He'd never imagined himself here, not giving orders, not controlling, but simply participating. The first days moved slowly. Grace established a new routine. Mornings were light journeys, walking through the house together to open curtains and let the sun in. Midday was meal maps, using picture cards to choose food. Afternoons were step challenges, small games to encourage movement. Daniel was awkward at first. He didn't know how to sit on the floor without toppling an entire Lego castle. He wasn't used to speaking in a gentle tone instead of a commanding one. But each time Eli or Noah held his gaze for more than a second, he knew he was on the right track. One afternoon, Grace set up a challenge hallway with chairs, pillows, and strips of colored tape. Noah stopped halfway, lips pressed tight. Daniel knelt down, holding out his arms. "You can go slow. I'll be right here." Noah's eyes wavered. Then he stepped forward. Each step trembled, but as he neared, he fell into Daniel's arms. Daniel held him close, saying nothing, afraid his voice would break. Eli stood nearby, watching, and for the first time, a faint smile flickered on his face. These moments weren't loud, they weren't dramatic, but to Daniel, they were bigger than any achievement he'd ever earned. As Grace packed up her materials that day, Daniel murmured, "Thank you for coming back." She simply smiled. "We're only just beginning." That autumn, golden leaves lined the driveway to the Whitmore home. The air carried the scent of wood and baked apple pie, signs of a warm evening ahead. Daniel had prepared everything carefully. No lavish party, no fancy restaurant, just a wooden table on the porch, a white cloth, a few small candles, and a glass jar filled with smooth stones, each one representing a moment they had shared. Grace stepped onto the porch in a cream-colored knit dress. The candlelight reflected on her face, warming her eyes. "Is something special happening tonight?" she asked, half smiling, half curious. Daniel rose, walking toward her. In his hand was a small wooden box. He opened it, revealing a simple gold-banded ring with a single, clear stone in the center. "Grace," he began, his voice low but steady, "when you walked into this house, you didn't just change Eli and Noah, you changed me. You taught me that hope isn't the enemy and that love can begin again, even after it's been broken." He knelt down. "I don't just want us to be a team raising the boys. I want us to be a family, a real one. Will you marry me?" Grace froze. Tears shimmered in the candlelight. She glanced toward the window, where Eli and Noah stood, holding their breath. Both boys smiled and nodded as if urging her on. She turned back, nodding softly. "Yes, Daniel." A small cheer came from inside the house. Daniel slipped the ring on her finger, then pulled her into a steady, gentle embrace. The wedding took place 2 months later, right there in the Whitmore garden. No sweeping gown, no grand orchestra, just a few close friends, Marcia and, of course, Eli and Noah. Grace stepped out from the porch in a simple white dress, lavender sprigs in her hair. Daniel waited under the arbor, wearing a navy suit, his eyes never leaving her. Eli served as the ring-bearer, Noah as the flower-bearer. Both boys wore their roles with pride, and as they reached the front, Eli whispered to Grace, "Now our home is forever." Their vows were short but true, to raise the boys together, to keep this house filled with light and laughter. When Daniel kissed Grace, lavender petals from Noah's hands drifted down around them. The golden light of late afternoon bathed the garden, as if blessing their new beginning. That evening, they sat on the porch steps. Daniel, Grace, Eli, and Noah. No one said much. Eli rested his head on Grace's shoulder. Noah leaned against Daniel. The jar of smooth stones still sat on the table, glinting in the porch light. And for them, that was everything. A family, whole and at peace.